Welcome everyone to the Adversity to Advantage podcast. I'm very excited because we've been chatting for a little while and trying to get this arranged, but we've got Bill Ryder Jones with us, who is a well-known, I should say, songwriter, musician, producer, composer. He co-founded the band The Choral, and we've had some interactions through certain events around talking about mental health in the music industry. But today, I'm just really curious to understand a little bit about your journey, Bill, and get to know you. Welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
It's great to have you. So tell our listeners a little bit more about you, the things that you do, the music that you write, like what inspires you?
That's a lot. What I do, you pretty much summed it up. I'm in my studio, I produce music for other people, I occasionally make music of my own, and I write for people on occasion, yeah, that's kind of my job, and I love it, and it's what inspires me. I mean, I love being around music and people who want to make music, and I find it a very rewarding, cathartic thing, you know.
Process.
Yeah, that's me, really.
Well, music's been part of your life from quite a young age. You started your first band quite young. How old were you then?
13 when we started, and we got our record deal when I was 16. And I've been in, and I'm 30, well, coming up to me 36th birthday. So it's been kind of 20 years in the industry professionally. Like such a, you know.
What does that feel like?
To say it's weird, particularly as I've got this light making me look quite young.
Yeah. You look about 25.
I know, if I turn the light off, it'd be like... but yeah, 20 years, I mean, yeah, it's a long time, isn't it? It's more than half my life.
20
so, yeah, you know, it is. You just get on something happens, and then you start, you know, you go along with it for a bit, and then 20 years later, and
you talk to me and you're like, fuck, 20 years, man.
Yeah.
That's
trying to think about it too much.
But 13 is quite young to be starting any kind of career, and I guess you started it from an interest perspective. But take us back just for a second. So pre-13, right? So childhood and stuff. What was that like? Do you think that your parents, the education system, like prepared you for what life on this 20-year track in the music industry was going to be like?
No, I don't think. Well, it's like, I mean, I know you know a little bit about my childhood through thing we did for Spotify, but like there's so much of it that the memories have just been lost to me, that it's quite hard to remember a great deal. Probably up until I was 13, to be honest with you. It's like I can't imagine. I mean, at 16, I think my parents my father was slightly, I'd got into college, just scraped into college. I think my father thought that was the way you would go. My mother was always very supportive of, and is, whatever I want to do, really. She doesn't have, you know, she's all just about, like, you know, whatever you want to be happy kind of person. And my father, you know, as soon as we got our record deal, my dad got behind it too. The education, I don't know how parents or the education system would ever know how to advise a teenager about going into the creative industries. You know, it's not particularly then. That was like 1999 when we got signed. You know, there was very little conversation even about mental health, let alone having a 20-year career in music, which is rare anyway. You know?
For sure. You sort of think, well, maybe it's a one-hit wonder. You can't sort of predict anything when you're in those early stages, can you?
No. And also, like, I was different to the rest. All the lads in the band had jobs. I was just a little bit younger, and all of a sudden there's like a ton of money in your bank account at 16, 17. And I remember my dad at the time saying, you need to be putting a deposit down on a house. This is like what you do.
It's sensible.
Be fine, you know, we're going to be fine, we're going to be great. And then 20 years later, I still haven't got a deposit for a house. I'm thinking...
Your dad was right.
But he was right, yeah, he absolutely was right. And I think I could have probably listened to him a little bit more. Like, but again, I don't think there's certainly no rule book for parenting.
Oh, exactly.
And also for like, you know, trauma and kind of the other things that life throws at you.
So exactly, without going into it, but just for clarity for the listeners, there was some trauma that went on for you when you were quite a bit younger. It affected some of your memories and experience. And then when you're 13, was music already maybe your expression or your escapism, sort of in those early teenage years?
Yeah, I think I'd always been able to play like the piano like from as long as I can remember. But it didn't really connect with me until I got a guitar, and then again, that's still quite hazy. The only memory I've got is kind of just wanting to play the guitar all the time. So I'm you know, assuming that there's that I got something out of it. I wasn't very talkative. I'm still struggle with words, you know, and how to express what I'm feeling. I think probably, yeah, I think music, the way I feel about music now would make me think that, you know, it started when I was 13, when I was like the most obsessed I've ever been about learning an instrument and finding, I guess I was finding ways of understanding or creating some order by, you know, the rules that are governed and dictated by that bit of wood and the order of the strings.
Because what was the experience of performing like? So moving from like practicing in your bedroom or whatever to getting on stage and then building a following and all those sorts of things.
Awful. Still, yeah, it's still awful. Yeah. It was really bad. Like it's really strange. Like it was really bad when the choral started. I was very, like, I couldn't hold food down the day of the gig and constantly thrown up, and I was very, very thin. Now, despite still having some quite, you know, debilitating anxiety issues, I find performing a bit easier now. I think it must be an age thing. I don't know. But yeah, back then it was, oh God, I hated it, yeah. I remember when there was a period when you start to get noticed as a band, like we had like people from Warner and Sony and Universal all come up to our little rehearsal room up in Liverpool and watch us, like we'd play a few songs and kind of showcase for them before they sign you. And I remember our manager at the time, Alan, had to pull me aside and say, you're going to have to turn around and face these people. Just...
You're like, the music's still coming out, surely it's fine. All I literally had to say, like, face the audience.
Yeah. I a real problem with making eye contact with people, and I don't know. I think I was just more comfortable, despite having shaved my head, bicked my head in protest to something that I can't remember.
I did that.
I always wanted to not be seen, or, you know. Sorry. I'm not really sure what I was thinking. I was quite a strange young man, I think.
But it's a strange age anyway, because you both want to be seen and you want to hide, because we're the most awkward we'll ever be at that stage. And, you know, find our identity and figure out who we are and find some kind of that we matter in the world. So there is often that kind of conflict. And then for you, it must be a little bit more extreme because you're on stage and you have these expectations now to present yourself in a certain way.
It's absolutely so true, and quite strange that you brought that up, because I told you I've started with a new therapist. I was with them yesterday, and we talked quite a lot about that conflict of how I still live where I live, mainly because no one really cares about what I do here, but also like, and how a big part of how people see us as a musician is someone who's quite humble and not like, you know, your rock and roll star, you know, and a little bit more like normal guy. But at the same time, I do have this thing where I'm basically saying to everyone, look at me.
Yeah. I have a message. I have something.
You can kind of, you know, we talked about that at length, and I realised just how ill at ease I am with those two things that I want. And I never really realised, and that was only the second session I've had with him, to kind of have that realisation this thing's been bothering me and I've never been able to put it into words. But yeah, same problem at 16 as at 35. It's a bit...
Yeah. Well, it's just trying to marry up, like, and I'm sure there's more than two sides of you. Those are the two sides we're talking about, but there's going to be other sides that want to step in and want to hold back. And, you know, and I guess life is kind of about, in my opinion, growth. And it's like an eternal journey to figure out who we are in different environments and what we want, and ask ourselves the tough questions and whether we're brave enough to do the work to moving that in that direction.
Well, that's it. I find with a lot of people, well, let's just talk about myself. I only really decided to re-enter into therapy when I actually got fed up with the way I was living, that it actually gives you a strength to go, I've got to go and get this sorted now. As for the last 5 years, I've been quite happy with that whole confusion, the cycles of, you know, the coping mechanisms that I've created myself that are clearly no bloody good to me. And it is hard, isn't it? You know, it's the tough questions, and it's going over old things, particularly with what this new thing that I'm getting into, which is about trying to kind of access some of those memories that were lost to me, and having to go over things that feel like they happened to someone else, but still getting, you know, we were talking about like my traumatic event, and it doesn't really feel like it happened to me, but, you know, I'm like crying as I'm talking it through. And it's just points like that where you go, oh God, you know, I'm pretty far down this road here. Like there's a real buffer somewhere, you know, that needs, and that's like playing around with your brain is it's worrying, you know. You think, God, what's gonna come up, you know?
Yeah, scary.
It is. Well, you set tough questions and tough, and a lot of hard work.
Yeah, and
you've got to want to do it, haven't you? You know?
Yeah, and showing up consistently to it. I remember I did a trauma therapy called IRRT, something recensoring, reprocessing, whatever it was, which got me, as you're describing, sort of into a place where I was repeating the trauma in some way. And it was good, it was safe, and the whole thing. But then the woman like records part of the session. And so you literally every day afterwards have to play it back to yourself and do this little scoring kind of journaling exercise. And I was a bit like, I did not sign up for that. Like the next morning I would like have nightmares and wake up crying. And the instruction was like re-listen to this recording of the traumatic event, but you're listening from the perspective of your adult self. Right. So they try and separate out the child self, who is like helpless and traumatized and in this victim mode, and kind of bring in your adult self that is, you know, smart and wise and has learned things and, you know, loves themselves and all these sorts of things, and have this dialogue. But I was like, this is the wrong month for this.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
I'm like, I got shit to do. I can't be walking down the street like falling apart.
That's why it's so, well, it's just so tricky, isn't it? Like, who has the time or the funds to be able to stop work for a month to do intense?
Yes, and I know that you reached a sort of breaking point in your own band when you were younger, and many of us, we don't invest in that type of work. But what happens is it builds up, and then we're forced to take time off, for burnout or mental health issues, or like that's what we're actually working with. It's like
we're better at like picking up pieces, collecting pieces like when the shit hits the fan, than actually like the self-preservation, taking care of things as and when.
Better at it.
We're paying bills. Like,
yes.
If I just paid every bill that came in when it came in, be fine. But they scare me, so I leave it 6 months, and then then it's a mad panic to sell something, and it's a bad trade, right? It really needs sorting out.
But you're saying we're better at picking up the pieces. We're only better at it because those are the times when we're forced to do it, or we're going to be homeless, or our relationships are going to break down, or we're going to physically be ill, or like we're forced to do the things in order to survive. So our kind of fight or flight kicks in, and it's harder, I guess, and I guess over time I've learned what my investment process is like, that I've got to do certain things in order to prevent me from being suicidal again, or from doing some of the things that the positions that I got into. So you're 16, you reach a bit of success, you're scared on stage, but you're showing up anyway. It's the only thing I guess you know how to do. Do you drop out of college, or are you still keeping that up?
No. As soon as we got the money, we were out.
There's no point. And so where did that lead? You like, what was that journey like for you?
There was a lot of drugs very early on. So again, my memory is a little bit hazy around the whole thing. Yeah. But, it's like a bubble. You never really have to grow up if you're in that environment. There's always someone holding your hand. You get picked up, taken to gigs. Someone takes care of your taxes. You don't. And then you're dealing with like this very strange dynamic of kind of 5, 6 young men all trying to work out who they are individually and also as part of a kind of clan. I don't think that's normal to me, but from speaking to other people, I think you think about that now and you go, yeah, that's probably not.
Well, it's probably exaggerated because everyone maybe parties more, or discovers the opposite sex, or just discovers fun versus responsibility, like those sorts of things. But I guess you didn't have to learn how am I going to get a regular job or pay my bills, and you could just go with the flow in that sense.
Yeah, and at times it was great, but I think my memory of the whole thing was of being like just very unhappy. Strange. It's quite hard to reflect on that whole like 10 years that I was in, that we from when we got signed to when I left, because there was like, it was quite a steep, we first 2 records did really well, and then there was this kind of thing happened. So there's a lot of weird stuff, and like you said, you talk about exaggerating. I see it in groups quite a lot with younger groups. Like I say, everyone's so desperate to like work out which one they are in the band. You do become like a caricature of whatever persona you already were. So I went more into quiet guitarist one. And also, at 16, like the first people I identified with were those kind of guitarists in bands, who, Graham Cox and Nick McCabe, and, not the one who was like,
the kind of moody.
Like you go and you get a green light to go and do that fully, and you wonder if you'd have been, if I'd have been like that had I not been in the band, or whether I'd have just been, worked out what I'm getting at, I guess, I'm questioning whether like I actually was meant to do any of that. You know, I only picked up music because my big brother played, and I think it was probably a way of staying close to him after his passing. And you know, I do sometimes think, oh, was that just that one decision that I made to pick up the violin when I was 7, when Daniel died, and I'm here, and maybe there would have been other things that could have been good. I don't know. So I've gone off topic there.
We love tangents. How old was Daniel? What happened there?
Daniel died in 1991. So he was 9 years old. He had an accident on a family holiday. Yeah, that was it.
And so there was so yeah, you're musing on, you know, what part of you was affected by that and wanted to keep his memory alive or connect with him in some way, which led you on a certain track.
Well, yeah, it's all like just wondering. I mean, I remember when I first, just before I got my diagnosis with the dissociative, I've got like dissociative issue. Before I got my diagnosis, I had these episodes, these really strange things, and I, for some reason, decided to get in touch with my old primary school teacher, who was also very close to my brother. And she, at the time, this was 2008, 2009. She, at the time, kind of expressed her thought that I may have been trying to fill this hole, probably for my mother, because she was so much closer to Daniel than she was to me, and kind of grew my hair out after he died and started wearing his clothes, and, you know, started skateboarding and playing violin and kind of, you know, not doing it, and basically kind of morphing into him somewhat. And yeah, and you know, you know, it would make sense, wouldn't it, for a 7-year-old to do that? But you know, it's not that I don't love what I do. I just wonder. Yeah, I wonder if I'd have got involved in music at all.
Those sort of sliding doors moments, isn't it? Where one decision affects the trajectory. Are you spiritual at all?
I believe in. I mean, you know, I don't have any faith in organised religion. I believe. I mean, I'm a musician. You know, there's things that happen in music with the energy that I fully believe in and give myself to and feel. I guess it's a word. The word itself kind of makes me feel my nipples a bit. Like, I don't know why. It just like.
It's interpreted in so many sort of dodgy ways, right?
Hey?
It's interpreted in so many sort of ways that are like attributed to organized religion or to cults or to just crazy shit, right? And I guess, I mean, your own connection to some kind of energy or something other, or soul, or, you know, something magical in that sense, or something that we just can't put an explanation on.
Yeah. No, I believe there's a force. I believe there's a collective. There's something that you know. I think the world's too full of these tidal shifts, these epochs, and the planet seems to go one way at certain times, and also like it's actually been like, I don't want to be to generalize too much, but I've known some amazing women in my life, and I can think of 3 or 4 of them. One in particular, an ex-partner, who made me realise that actually there's things that men just are a little bit later to the party of recognising. I think the amount of times a girlfriend said, "Watch out for him," or "Watch out for her, there's something off," and I've always gone, And 6 months later, you go, oh yeah, they were absolute shit. And I didn't say. And I think like it's this instinct, isn't there, that you can kind of cultivate. But I certainly get like, it's as simple as like you get a bad vibe off someone, don't you? And it's about like recognizing that. But I also have I do believe. Yeah, I'm a believer. Yeah, that's what I'm getting at. I'm a believer. There's solely through my love of music. Music can't. I don't think music can be. I don't think it can be an accident. I don't mean that I think that someone created it.
Yeah.
I just think it has to exist. And I think for music to just exist as it does, there has to be some kind of purpose to everything, because it just means too much to me, you know.
And so I know that you spent some time away from the band and got your diagnosis and sort of had a bit of a crisis point there, and have had different challenges throughout your life. And then just to circle back to what you just said, do you feel that there's some kind of purpose in all of those experiences that you have?
I don't think there's a purpose to my life. I don't think. God, this a lot of. We should have done this later in the day. I haven't even had a drink yet. What time is it? 11:03. I think it's important to do your best to be good. You know, I think it's a much better, like the atheist life of kind of doing good for good's sake rather than some kind of celestial reward is important to me. I'm incredibly selfish, but I do like the fact that I get messages from people who say that what I do helps them. It's not the reason I do it. It's certainly not my purpose for being. But I do think there is a duty, I think, as a human. If you particularly haven't watched like how Daniel passed before he got a chance to do a lot of these things, I think I feel a sense of duty to try to be a good person, you know. And I think everything that's happened to us, as at times I've been quite a bad person, you know. I've done some really terrible things to some really nice people, and I think, yeah, all the ups and downs and all the ins and outs have led us here, where I genuinely do try and help people, and that in itself can be a problem, you know. Very often, I've found that there's a certain type of person who's drawn towards me, and quite often they think I've got it boxed off and might be able to help them. And I find that a lot of my relationships, no matter how long or short, I've been sought out as someone that someone can lean on. And I've had relationships, you know, I've had my three main relationships, I was kind of being cared for by people. But I found recently that I'm very open with people, and they take that as a sign of and they should, that they can be open with you. But I've had to just kind of distance myself from a few people this last year, just because I'm not a therapist, and I'm not a caregiver. I just don't have it.
And you've got to look after yourself in order to.
That's it. That's that. I mean, mother's very similarly to me. I get it from my mother. My mother's got an unending well of strength for other people and for herself, but she just doesn't take care of herself. She won't watch this. Doesn't do the internet. You know what I mean? Like, it's just a lot easier to ignore yourself and to try and help other people, and I think that's got me in a lot of trouble in the last couple of years. In fact, I think it was healthier for me when I was being just a bit of a shit and just thinking about myself in certain ways.
I totally get it. Totally. Yeah. And I'm interested in that transition from moody guitarist with his hair in his face, like that guy. Yeah, I can't quite do it. I need to get my hair out and just like play with it. So that guy and the guy who's really quite open. Yes, maybe you still find it difficult. It's not your comfort zone to be talking, and articulating some of these things. But there's lots of news articles, some interviews of you talking about your mental health, talking about the breakdown that you had, and coming back into music, and you've been really quite open about some of those more personal sides of your story. What changed, or what do you think allowed you to grow into the guy who's quite open about his story?
Well, I have no pride anymore. I was cut from those ties that, that kind of northern thing of being like a fella. I kind of mentioned it at the podcast. There was a significant moment in my life where I had to move back into my mother's house. And I was 23. I had to share the bed with her because I was in such a state. After that, you just, in your own mind, you're not a man at all. And then when I realized I wasn't a man, I mean, you know what I'm getting at. When I lost that kind of ego, and then it became clear to me that actually that, alongside with the realization that most of my problems came from the fact that I was hiding things, and not talking about things, then I think it was one of the few times in my life where I actually had like a light bulb moment. I was like, that's why I do all these things. That's why I have all these secrets, secrets about my sexuality, or the drug, my issues with drugs and alcohol, and all kinds of things, and realized that it was just too heavy, and I ended up at 23 sharing a bed with my mother because I was just completely spent. And and at that point, I think that's just like, I think you've evolved. I think we've evolved to like at certain points. No matter how much you try and hide from things, it's a really good analogy. This, like, I love like zombie films, and despite zombies not being very fast, they don't get tired. So I think it's very much the same about running and from your problems and keeping secrets. You can, no matter how hard you try and keep them away, they're just relentless, And then I think after I got my diagnosis, and I did a lot of talk therapy, and I realised just how beneficial it was. I did one interview where someone asked me about how I was. An old friend who knew everything, and had picked up on some lyrics on one of the tracks, and it just made sense not to lie about why I write about the things that I write. And then that started, and then the next time we did an interview, and then very quickly after, I opened up to the public, like I'm Michael Jackson. No. It's like, like I'm Justin Bieber or someone hugely successful. You start to see just how many, like, it's kind of every day I get a message on by some kind of social media, someone saying, I think the dissociative disorder that I've actually got, which is fairly hard to get. Not so much now, but 10 years ago it was quite. My GP didn't have a clue what derealization or depersonalization was, and I reckon there's about 10 people who've messaged me there going, I didn't realize this was a thing until I heard you, or until I heard that song and I heard you talking about what that song was about. I think I probably diagnosed quite a few kids, and I think that when you start to get into that feedback loop of, I'm doing something that's because I think the conversation needs to be had, and then you start to see that it clearly did need to be had, because even at my level, I'm getting people it's helping them, then you're just on one then, and then it despite in the last year would actually like to, for myself, would like to not actually be talking so much about my mental ill health problems, because I don't want, I'm aware of the music industry, I'm aware how much I romanticized people like Ian Curtis and, you know, Leonard Cohen and Nick Drake and the Great Depressed. Told you. I'm wary of that, but I think that if I didn't have the conversation, if I didn't talk about it, then I'd be wasting an opportunity that I've got to do something good, you know. And you got to do that. And it's such a selfish career being a musician, you know, talking about yourself all the time. Yeah.
Well, there's something in the process of talking and getting away from the secrets, especially when you're on a public platform, that is just healing, right? That it's the secrets and our isolation that can just kill us, to be extreme, or can definitely bring us down and suck the enjoyment from life. I've also found that being really open has allowed me to connect on a deeper level with people. Not everyone. It also, like you said, brings the sort of needy people, or the ones that just want your energy, and you know, rather than that connection. But it's also helped me go, oh, people see me, I see them, and we can have a better sort of human experience. Moving into the future, like, what's the message you think you want to be giving in the world?
I mean, I'm such a contradiction. I really don't think I've got anything more to say about it than just, you know, it's, I think the point is, it is all right to be who you are, and to, you know, but it's very simple things, like things that everyone knows in their gut, the things that you knew instinctively before they were kind of taught out of you. You know, don't impinge on free will. Don't let anyone impinge on your free will. Be respectful and polite, you know, and express yourself, because we've been given this cognitive, you know, this new part of the brain, the only species to ever have, you know, for as far as we know, to be able to conceptualize and think philosophically. And I think what a waste it would be to live in ignorance of that kind of gift, you know. I think it is such a shame that our species hasn't kind of, in 150,000 years we've kind of been here, and the 4,000 years we've been civilized, still don't live in a world of complete tolerance, and I'm slightly pessimistic about the race. I think we're probably, truthfully, it's a bit of a losing battle, I think, but I think there's a domino effect that you've got to be a part of, you know, just be influenced positively by what came before, and then to knock into what's ahead of you and to influence that in a positive way. And I think whether it changes much, you don't know, do you? But you've got to get some sleep at night, I think.
But yes, we do need to get some sleep at night. I'm reading this book. Yeah, I'm reading this book called Everything is Fucked, and the subtitle is, it's a book about hope. Everything is Fucked, a book about hope, and it's saying things like, this is actually we're actually in the best, most progressive time in the world with technology and all of this sort of thing, which is actually giving us space for existential crises and to like be thinking about this stuff, you know. Whereas when you're in survival mode, you sort of can't be doing those sorts of things. And it's interesting that just with technology and with everything on our phones, everything, you know, accessible all of the time, we can have this sense that the world's going to end, that we're in danger, that there's wars everywhere, when actually essentially our day-to-day life is safe and can be connected. But it's like people are walking around in this fear state because they're constantly seeing 50 years ago, you didn't see every detail of, the rape or the pillage or the bomb or whatever that was going on the other side of the world. Even though wars were happening, tribes were fighting, these things were happening. And so I think we're living in this day and age where our fight or flight response is like we're constantly in trauma in a way that's just building up, building up, building up. And there's even, more science around that, how stress and anxiety are the things that build up to cancer or to physical illnesses because we're just not present and aware.
I think that's absolutely right. I think it is strange how we're actually, factually, this is a relatively peaceful time in human history.
Anxiety, depression, 70% more children and young people are experiencing, acute mental health issues. And I think some of that is, this is controversial, but that whole thing about building resilience, and actually we need challenge in our lives in order to feel stronger to get to the next level. And when we stay quite safe and we protect our children or ourselves from any kind of challenge, we actually don't have the opportunity to grow into strong human beings that can actually take a bit,
It's a strange thought that my mother blames her generation for my generation.
Every generation does.
I think the way they were brought up, as they grew up, they saw all the shortcomings of, pull your trousers up, post-war, kind of get on, stiff up a bit. So they were incredibly liberal with us, and probably we were allowed to get away with murder a little bit. So I think it's a hard one, isn't it? Because every generation's going to bring their kids up with the hindsight of the errors that their parents' generation made. But yeah, I agree that this technology one's a strange one.
What's your relationship like with technology?
Well, it's very entwined with when I have dissociative episodes, which I haven't had for a serious one for 3 years. So sure, they're very technology based. Kind of my thing was always feeling like the world was like a simulation, and as a result, technology does just I think it's amazing. It can be such a wonderful thing. I think Twitter's so great for calling people out, and I've learned a hell of a lot in the last 3 years through my last partner Kaya mainly, but also through Twitter. Just about the realities of what it is to be have a different skin colour, which is something I was completely oblivious to as a middle-class white man until I was 31. And I think it can be amazing for like, say, seeing things that, our grandparents would have never seen, the real lives of people that you'll never meet. I also think, like anything, it can at times be a playground for idiots and evil people, but I think, I'm not quite settled with it yet. It's weird though that you say, think about, I like it because it helps art. I think it's good for art. I think that's the one thing that really we've done well as a
It just disrupts the old system of control and allows people to put their music out or their message out in a wider, free way, right?
Yeah, I think that's one good thing. I also think it's actually easier to make something that sounds good without shelling out a load of money as well.
Yeah.
And I think it actually has introduced new art forms. The advance of technology has made new music. People have. I did a writing session last week with someone who writes not with a guitar or with a piano, but on the computer. And they come up with things that I could never just hear and play. I think that's quite incredible. But then, you said something earlier about I wish I could rewind this. I can't remember what it was you said, but it made me think of like the war poets and how you know they were in a complete state of trauma and, and still found it in them to express within the boundaries of poetry. And I don't know why that felt quite important to me when you said it, but I quite remember where I was going with that. You might have to rub this from me.
That's fine. but what I'm hearing is just that the generational impact, right? And what we're left with in our day and age, and then our children's and the younger generation, is technology as a first language rather than something that needs to be learned. That communication and connection. But I think, and what I see all the time, is the lack of human connection and conversation, and that, you know, it's even harder to pick up the phone and talk to people these days. It's all on chat, it's all on social media. That kids are never learning the skill of connection and wondering why they're feeling things like anxiety and depression, because that's one of the challenges I'm talking about. It can be a challenge to be a shy, awkward kid, to learn to speak in front of people, to put yourself out there in that way. Yeah. And there's something missing. So what do you do now to look after your mental health? We've talked about talking therapies, or even just your fulfillment and like your enjoyment of life. Like, what do you need to keep in balance? And we've talked about drugs and alcohol, because that's in my story as well in our previous conversations, and about how that can be both escape and tragedy, right? It can be bliss and carnage. But what shows up for you?
So to keep myself level, there's three things really that I always fall back on. Nature, get out in nature as much as I can. Exercise, like I swim every other day, play football twice a week if I can, you know. And I also get back in touch with my parents and make effort to see friends. And now, like, interestingly, the fourth thing that I do is try and keep off my fucking phone, you know, because you do it. It's a real instant. If I feel like shit and someone's taking a half decent photo of me, I know I can put it online and get a quick, quick ego boost from it. And I think, and that's absolutely not real life, is it? You know. So yeah, and obviously, I mean, I don't take drugs anymore. We talked about that. I still drink way more than I should be doing, but that's under control. But that's just balance. You know, the reason I'm back in therapy now is that you know, when you do your consultation with any therapy and you get that hell sheet, which on a scale of 1 to 100, what are you? You know.
Yeah.
And I was filling this thing out, and I was looking at the answers that I was like, this looks really bleak. She's going to read this back, and I know she's going to say, well, judging by your score, you're severely depressed and severely anxious.
Yeah.
And fair enough, she had to do that. And I think this woman's amazing. I think she's going to be great for me. But I've been severely depressed, and it's a void, isn't it? You know, there's nothing else exists other than the senselessness and the uselessness. That's, you know, there's no love in anything, is there? I was like, I said to her, like, I'm not severely depressed at all. I think life's fucking shit. I think that's a terrible thing. Life can be amazing. I think at the minute the world feels a bit shit to me at the minute. I had a friend try and do themselves in about 2 weeks ago. I'm not getting enough time off. I'm not making enough money to be able to just go on holiday. You know, I've looking back, and I've kind of ruined quite a few good relationships for fear. You know, like, I'm back in this stupid cycle where I'm drinking and I'm not looking after myself. This was a few weeks ago, right? So the answer is, I don't know why. what I'm looking for now is the answer to your question, like get happy kind of thing. You know, what do I need to do to not just cope and not just string? You know, I'm fortunate. Like I can always laugh at, you know, this silliness that we live in. Like, but I don't want to just do that anymore. I want to, you know, I want those moments of, you know, occasionally, you know, like the last time it happened, I was like in the Mediterranean Sea, like snorkeling. And I was just like, oh God, isn't it amazing? Like, isn't just everything just fucking brilliant? And there's so few and far between, and I just want, that's the next step for me. I want to get to a point where they happen as often as they should, because we do live in an amazing world, and, you know, we are amazing beings. But for 20 years, I've just more or less always been like, this is a bit fucking shit, isn't it? You know, I think that is, that's, and so therapy, I guess, would be the answer to the question. Well, I'm hoping it is, you know, breaking the cycles, you know.
Yeah. Therapy, coaching, asking yourself, like, I remember when I was asked for the first time what I want, like, what do you want? And how revolutionary that question was for me. Because you're talking about a 20-year track that you're on, right? Which is music, music, and it just kind of one thing leads to another. And I imagine lots of people have a say in sort of where that goes. And it must sometimes just feel like it's a life of its own. It's taken on a life of its own, right? But when I was asked what I want, I actually had to figure out how to answer that question because it was so like foreign to me. I'm like, sorry. Yeah. Because the automatic answer is, what do I need to do? What should I do? And that's based on society, friends, like, you know, other conditioning of what my life should look like. And once I realized that actually I could answer the question, and then I would have to put the action in place to like plan the good stuff. Like we always plan the like kind of shitty stuff. And like, I've got to pay my bills. I got to do this. Like we got to do this gig, or we've got to. But then what if we like clean slated our year and just planned the good stuff first, and then mapped in everything else around it, you know?
Be something, wouldn't it?
Wouldn't it? But then there's also something, like I'm listening to quite a bit of sort of Buddhist teachings and alternative kind of ways of spirituality. The trick of being able to find joy within ourselves, no matter where we are. So we can be in a shitty situation, but still have cultivated the ability to find joy within that. Like that's the journey I'm on.
That's so foreign to me. Like, because I love being on my own, but I can't stand myself. And it's a very hard thing. You know what I mean? Like, that's not, I'm not trying to be funny, but it is funny. Like, I can't bear someone being near me all the time. But if I'm just sat on my own with just, you know, like, I won't talk, you know, I'm happy. I can't stand. Yeah, it's, and what's really interesting about you saying, you know, what do you want? And the hardest question, because it's so easy to list a few things that you'd like, but what you actually want from, like when it was asked, put to me yesterday, that question.
Okay.
It was like, well, I just want to be a 35-year-old man who doesn't suffer from panic attacks. And I think if I had that, I would be happy working in Morrison's. I mean, I'm sure that's not true.
Yeah.
But you get so caught up in just wanting away from the bad things that you can't. The therapist was like, yeah, okay, so let's say you find a way of coping with your panic attacks. Then what do you want? It's like, there's nothing past not having anxiety. I don't expect to not have depression or dissociative episodes, but I just like to get the train to Liverpool without either having to take some Valium or have a few drinks, or just fucking knuckle it, you know. It's a very hard thing to look past and think about who you want to, you know, because we talked briefly before about music and whether that's like what I actually do want, or do I want to, you know, the only other thing I really like is playing computer games, sport, and reading books on like ancient civilizations. and only one of those things I could do as a career.
Turn into money, yeah.
You know what I mean? But it's such a hard thing to like even picture a world where it's just like, yeah, it's just,
I think it takes
so hard
practice though. Like the first time, and this is where meditation or visualizing or journaling or whatever is different for everyone, can just help put the puzzle pieces into that picture. Because positive psychology is very much what we want rather than what do we want gotten rid of. And our automatic response is often, well, I don't. And that's a good starting point. I want less pain. I want less of this. But like you've already said, like the scuba diving was amazing, or I'm sure there's been other experiences.
I'm not quite gutsy enough for scuba diving.
I think you need to move, because that's the first thing. You're in the wrong place. But there's something about creating space in this world of noise to actually, and you're doing it in therapy, to actually ask us to even consider the answer to these questions, right? And it isn't always, sometimes people are like black or white. It's like, jack in this career and go do that one. It's like you're still taking yourself with you. Like, let's be real, you're taking yourself with you, and that's still going to bring up challenges. But how can we learn, and I'm on this journey as well, to sit with ourselves, because I think there's something pretty powerful in that. Learn to listen to our intuition, which you were talking about earlier, and we need space to even be able to listen to that. If we're constantly surrounded by noise, we can't listen to our own intuition and like trust our own inner wisdom. And then the follow-up to that is practicing courage, because you can have the perfect vision, but if you don't actually practice doing the tough stuff every day to show up. And, the first time I was on stage speaking in front of an audience and telling some of my story, I was a mess. I was a nervous wreck, and I was a total mess. And I'm like, what the fuck am I doing? And, but I realized I was that scared that I had to do it more.
Yeah.
More like, and some people are like, I'm so scared, let me never do that again. And I'm like, I'm scared, let me go into that so I can get better and speak on bigger stages. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I understand. It's very hard to, I think that's the real challenge. Like, I found CBT to be a wonderful thing, but I find it, and I know quite a few people who have similar challenges myself. The hard thing is waking up the same person every day, and waking up as the person who doesn't mind journaling, and every single day you've got so much, like, life's just firing shit at you non-stop. And the problem is, and this is exactly why I find myself in these positions quite often. Well, I'm actually clearly in quite a good place right now, but a couple of weeks ago when I didn't want to do this, just for so many people, it's just so much, the infrastructure just isn't there. Why would you not just go and have a drink instead? Because it's just so much easier. Like, we're kind of
go with
it into that pen, and it's a real challenge to do something every day for the good, because sometimes it can be so. It's like exercise, isn't it? Whenever I go on a bit of a bender, it'll be like, not a bender, but when I'm like drinking too much for, so here we go. Last April, I decided to stop drinking, and I didn't drink for like 8 months, and it was great. I was really happy with myself. I wasn't doing silly things. I wasn't. I was looking well. I felt good. I was exercising. I felt like I looked good, and I wasn't being an arsehole. And And then I went, and then I started touring again, and then did a European tour, loads of bread, loads of beer, piled this weight on. Then started this year. It's like, right, let's get swimming. You swim and you go, I've got to lose a bit of weight. You swim, and you knacker yourself out on that first day. And then you can't swim again for 5 days, and you look at yourself in the mirror after a shower and you're like, oh God, like, and you see all the photos from gigs and the road section. I'm like, what's the fucking point? Like, it would take months of this to even get to a good, and it's so easy just to give up halfway through. It takes real strength, and if you haven't got support to every day turn up, then I'm very fortunate in that, like, you know, I can afford therapy and I can afford to go to the gym, but I literally know so many people who just can't.
But I think that can often be my mum said to me as a form of excuse that health was a rich man's game, and she can be struggling sometimes. And I was like, yes, that's true. And ideally, we would be able to afford these different things, or the NHS would be able to cover certain things. And yes, we need that. And I think we need to take some personal responsibility, because we're in the age of, you can learn anything off the internet now. Information is out there to support your physical health, your mental health, to build community, to talk to people, to connect. Like, all of those things are actually there with technology.
That's true, but you can't pretend there isn't. Like in this country, like the education system when I was growing up, so rinsed by Margaret Thatcher, and we were taught nothing about, like, you know, certain people are born in areas where they just are not educated well enough to be able to understand half of their problems, let alone see for them. And you know, particularly in like really working class areas where it's not always, and I don't want to generalize, but when it's not, you know, it's not always acceptable to be open about your issues, and
there's stigma for sure.
Yeah, and some people just can't. You know, my father, who's in the last few years has become way more switched on to how we should talk about women and, you know, anyone from the LGBTQ community. But that has taken 40 years and probably the internet. But 20 years ago, I don't think the world was set up for a man like him from where he came from with the education he had to understand his own issues. He's not had the easiest life. And so I understand what you're saying. There is no, I think there is an excuse for certain people not being able to help themselves, because it is.
I completely see what you mean.
Yeah.
There can be like a cultural, a family, a societal, like the messages are just repeated about, you know, look after yourself and
intellect. Like some people just aren't.
That's true.
You know, some people just couldn't grasp certain. You know, certain. I've been able to, like, my hatred of anxiety for so long, because I've been in and out of therapy for so long, and I've got such a clear understanding of why I am the way I am, and because I've told my story so many times. You know, a textbook, childhood trauma, drugs,
mental health issue.
Yeah, near-death experience, which triggered the panic attacks, which led the whole thing. You know. And then cycle. But I was always smart enough to understand the amygdala and the limbic system, and, you know, and why, and fight or flight, the reptilian brain, and why this, and it made perfect sense. And none of it helped in the sense that I didn't feel isolated, which is probably the killer.
Yeah,
you probably agree. But if you can't understand all that, then of course, one thing you will be able to understand is that drugs and drink, and quite often violence, will mask those things, or they will just replace your anxiety. And that's anyone's smart enough to learn that lesson, as evil as it is. You know, I do feel for. I know I've certainly been very privileged in always been able to afford help, and always I've had the capacity to understand things. But I think a lot of the problems in this country come from a lack of education system, poor community outreach, and, you know, and probably up here, you know, the skid marks of Catholicism, you know.
For sure, religion and all the rest of it.
Toxic fathers, and, you know, and
masculinity. and even just the competitive nature of like everyone must achieve, and there's this track that success looks like this, and you must be on that track. If you're not there by the age of 22 or whatever, there's something wrong with you, and this comparing thing, and there's a lot swirling around. I want to respect your time. I feel like we could talk absolutely all day. When people like connect with you through Instagram or whatever, because you've told a bit of your story and they open up with you in some way, what advice do you give to people? Like, what do you try and just say or point them in the direction of? What do you usually say?
Might sound a little bit, I've had to start saying, I'm sorry, but I can't help you. In
the right direction.
I always say the same things that I said to you before. Get nature.
Yeah.
It's so hard because like I've had agoraphobia at times, monophobia. And sometimes someone says go out in nature. Not possible. Yeah. Exercise. Can't get out of bed. It's not possible. See friends or family. I don't have any. I mean, like, God. I don't know the answer, and I've had to start saying to people, because the problem that I have is that people are already engaged in a conversation with me before I've even met them, because they've heard the songs and we have a relationship. And the first thing I hear of it is a message from someone at 3 a.m. saying, I've had a really bad week, your music's helped. What can I do? And for a couple of years, I got involved with trying to help people and talk to them. Felt that was my duty. And I think that can actually be really dangerous. I'm not a therapist. I just try and point people in the right direction. And one thing that people can always do if they can't get outside or they can't exercise is they can write, and they can express themselves. And that is, you can do that you can do that in your imagination. And I think that's the one thing that you don't need any tools for, That's why it's such a gift. Yeah.
I love that so much. I certainly wrote bad poetry when I was younger, just as a way of...
I still am. I'm making money from it.
Look at you. So there might be some talent out there that they don't know they have. Because also, adversity to advantage, you've used some of your angst and your feelings and your experiences to influence your creative passion and your music and your lyrics. And so there is something about that journey for you that is actually enhancing or definitely influencing your music.
I'm certainly not talented enough to do this without
feeling it yourself.
Yeah, like it's a great thing that Graham Parsons wrote to his sister after I think their mother died, about how she could see this sadness as a gift because it gives them an understanding into a world, and it really contextualizes everything. I think I've learned recently it's okay to admit the things that you're good at as well as admit the things that you're bad at. And it's very important that I say things like, I've realized that I've got a talent for taking my feelings and the awful things that I've seen or felt and making them, putting them to music. And the act alone is an act of hope. That's the whole point of what I do. I'm just clinging to hope, and I'm good at that. And without all this, then I wouldn't be, and I'd still just probably be a guitarist in a band, not really doing much more than, and yeah, without a doubt, it gives you, adversity gives you a hell of a take on the world. If you're lucky enough to be in a position to capitalize on it, which I think sometimes I feel guilt for, but what else we're going to do?
Exactly. I love that. Thank you so much, Bill, for your time. Going deep, even though it's early and you haven't had a drink yet. I'm going to go for a swim after this. You'll be all right. Really appreciate it. Thank you so much for your time, and good luck in the summer and all the festivals and gigs that you've got. Thanks so much.